to the Martinus Cosmology podcast, our podcast dedicated to talks and reflections on life based on the world picture of the Danish writer Martinus. My name is Pernilla Dosell. I will be your host for today. And I have two guests here in the studio of the Martinus Institute in Copenhagen, where we are sitting right now. It's Mary McGovern, our usual host for this podcast. Welcome, Mary.
Hello, thank you.
And Sören Grind, who has been with us several times too. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you're here today because you are experts on Martinus cosmology or his spiritual science. You have explained this many times to people who want to know more about what Martinus has to say about our eternal nature. We could say, of course, he writes about many things, but today we would like to focus on what he tells us about our eternal core of being, you could say. I mean, we sit here right now around a table, we can see each other, we talk to each other, I can look out of the window and I see certain things, I hear things, but he tells us that there's more to it than that. There is more to us than we can see. Who are we really? That's what we perhaps always wanted to know, and he has some answers to that. So, would you like to start, Mary? What is our eternal core of being?
Yes, I would like to start, and just in saying that I would like to start, we have the answer actually, because I said the word I, and in our ordinary language we use this word I very much when we talk about ourselves. But this I is something that's not visible, it's invisible. If I lose weight, my eye doesn't get smaller. If I put on weight, my eye doesn't get bigger. If I lose an arm, my eye doesn't change, and so on. This I is really this innermost eternal core of being. It's that which experiences and it's that which creates. And in order to do that, it has to be attached to some spiritual structures, which we'll come into, and an organism. So we have some mental structures and we have a physical organism. But the I is actually the innermost core of our being, and it's not something that can die. There's no evidence that the I dies when the body dies. I mean, when you see a corpse, 1 minute it's alive and breathing and so on, and the next minute we can register that the person is dead, but we never saw the I, so where has it gone? We can see that something has happened to the organism, but since we never saw the I, is there any evidence for it ceasing to exist?
And you can also see the I as a stillness within us. Martinus talks about two aspects of us, the eternal part and the changeable part.
Yes.
And there is also always in a transformation, like our thoughts, they change all the time, and our feelings, they change, our body change, and we go through this evolution. But we also know from our experience that there is a center in us where everything is very still, and we are looking at life, we're experiencing life. But this stillness within is also a feeling of a center within us. So that's maybe a way that we in everyday life could register this aspect of us that is watching life, experiencing life. The stillness that was there when I was 5 years old, when I was 10 years old, when I was 50 years old, and so on. It's the same center. It's the stillness, the eternal aspect.
Yes, Martinus even calls it the fixed point, because in order to experience any kind of movement, and that can be a physical movement, a movement in space, but it can also be a movement in condition, like you grow from 5 years to 15 years to 50 years and so on, then in order to register any kind of movement, there has to be a still point. And this is what Martinus calls the fixed point, which is this I. So this stillness, this fixed point, is a precondition for being able to experience anything at all.
And of course he uses our language, certainly. He uses Danish, and you, Mary, has translated it into English, but he actually invents his own terms, his own concepts to describe these eternal structures. So what is his name? What is his term for the I?
He talks about the superconsciousness, which is the I in combination with what he calls, he also calls the I X1.
Yes, that's what I actually was thinking.
Yeah, he divides the living being into 3 basic parts, which he describes as X1, X2, and X3. He uses the letter X because it's just something that exists. It's not something that's ever been created.
And you could say he also says that is this divine aspect, the divine something,
yes,
that is within us. And when he talks about the divine aspects of us, it's also a way of showing that we are connected to the wholeness of the universe. It's some people have experienced and told us about the feeling of oneness, that they are one with everything, and then they are connected to this divine aspect within themselves that is also, you could say, the bridge over to all the other living beings' eternal aspect. So it's the divine something within all living beings that connects us all to this oneness.
So he uses different terms and expressions in order to make us understand, I think, and he often does that in his works. He often tries to use different metaphors, but this concept, this term X1, it might sound somewhat abstract perhaps. Why has it chosen to call it X1?
We could say it's because the structure, the eternal structure, it is also very, very abstract. If we go back in history, we could say that all the worship of the divine has been very connected with the physical world. So once we were worshipping God through a stone or a tree, and later in the church, in the temple, we thought God was in the temple of the church. And our training of the abstract thinking has grown through evolution, and that's why also many people they're going away from religions, because it's too concrete, you could say, too physical in a way, because they can think in much bigger terms. So the training of the abstract thinking, with also our studies in mathematics and physics and so on, has also led us to a point where we are able to grasp these eternal aspects also in an intellectual way. And we go in a way in a mathematical level when we start to talk about these abstract concepts with X1, X2, X3. And at the same time, Martinus says this is a theoretical construction. We can never separate the eternal I from its creation, from its capacity or capability of creating and experiencing life, or we cannot separate from its consciousness. It is a triune principle. It's 3 aspects of the same thing. So it's an abstract thinking of something that is never divided, but that's the way we can start to grasp it also with our intelligence and with our intuition. Gradually we will see that no, it's not separate, it is a oneness, it is one aspect, 3 aspects of the same thing. And these, you could say these X1, X2, X3, you can also divide it into 2 aspects, in that sense that the superconsciousness, as Mary told us about before, it is more the eternal aspects, that is the creator of the consciousness, that is X3, the created world. So in this worldview, consciousness is everything that we can sense. When you in the beginning of this podcast talk about we see each other, we see the nature around, in a way you could say all of this that we experience and see around us is consciousness in different crystallized forms, you could say. But behind all this universe, all the movements in the universe, there is superconsciousness behind you as a person, the animal, the plant, the planet, and the galaxies, and so on. There is a superconsciousness, there is a living being that has an urge to experience life and enjoy certain things and has its desires and so on. So it's really a living universe, and to see this living universe we have to understand these eternal aspects where we are walking through universe in eternal time as a cosmic voyage.
Superconsciousness, it's very interesting, I think, what we can find there. Perhaps you can tell us something more. We can only do this as an introduction, but we know that he also tells us that we have talent kernels in our superconsciousness.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us something more about that?
Yes. Actually, I've always been very interested in the whole concept of talent, because I was trained as a musician, and it's something people talk a lot about. That people say, "Oh, she's very talented," or "He's not so talented," and so on. And it was like this whole idea of talent was just something you were born with, and you couldn't do anything about it. Whether you couldn't decide whether you were talented or not. You just were talented or not. And it always bothered me, and I thought, I had a friend when I was studying music at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music in Glasgow. I had a friend, and she was always a bit better than me, and it wasn't just ordinary jealousy I felt. Perhaps there was an element of that. I don't doubt that, but it was more existential than that. I thought, how can it be that she is more talented than I am, and I want to be as talented as she is. So it was very important for me to understand this idea of talent, and I found that Martinus has the only explanation for the moment that I have found satisfactory, and that is this fact that talents are something that are built up from life to life to life to life. And for example, if I practice the violin in this life, I build up a talent which is not anything anyone can see. I mean, I can sit here and say, well, I can play the violin to a certain extent. It could be true, it could also be false. And you can't verify it until you give me a violin and I can show you. And that's because the talent in itself is something totally immaterial. It's not physical. You can't see it, you can't weigh it, you can't measure it until it's manifested. And then we're down in the X3 part. So we have talents for all sorts of things. We have talents for neighbourly love. We have talents for mathematics and art and science. We also have talents for creating atomic weapons and for being really evil and sadistic. So the term talent is just an expression for something one has practiced and practiced and practiced. And we have talents at many levels. And these create what he calls a talent kernel in our superconsciousness, in this X2, which can be manifested through the physical organism in one way or another. But it is in itself, the talent in itself is invisible.
I think it's so interesting with this concept of the talent kernels, because in a way you could say, when you understand that, you can understand, as you said, this concrete thing with playing the violin. You can also say that it is a way of understanding the whole universe.
Yeah.
Because in a way, everything that is manifested is an expression for a talent that a living being have built up.
Mm.
So even if you go out and see why is the planet turning around its own axis, it's also a talent kernel in an automatic, ingenious state. And when we walk, that's also a talent that we build up through evolution. So this analysis Martinus does of how we create talents through 3 states with A knowledge, B knowledge, C knowledge, it's a way of analyzing in a way all of creation. Because the A knowledge, that is something that we have gotten to know. We can see a person playing the piano and we get inspired. And then the B knowledge, that's the state when we are starting to train to be practice and try to be good at playing the piano. And that's, as we know, it's kind of a process of patience to create this talent in an ingenious state. And Martinus tells it could be about 4 lifetimes to be ingenious in playing the piano. And when it comes to this C state, this automatic function, then we don't have to do it in a conscious, aware way. So the ingenious pianist doesn't think, oh, where should I put my fingers? It's just an automatic function. They can focus on the artistic way of expressing these notes, so to say. And in that way, we can say that everything in the universe can be analyzed. Is it something that we are creating a new talent? Is it an automatic function? And maybe an automatic function that we are fed up with, for instance, becoming very angry in situations that we are sorry for afterwards and so on. We can have talents that is so automatic from the animal kingdom, our history, that we now think, oh, if I just could get over these old reactions. So everything is, we are able to understand and analyze. It's where are we building up a talent, or are we releasing, or what do you say?
Letting go.
Letting go of an old habit. And there we have this longing for, this driving force of all evolution. I want to leave some things behind. It's kind of a dark thing. We are satiated, and we have other things that we are longing for, that we want to build up, a new reaction, a new talent, and so on. So it's really a so deep, important analysis of all of the universe, of all behavior in everyday life.
And I think you could say that Martinus, in a way, supports the evolution of humane talents, because he shows us that if we want to create health, if we want to create peaceful relationships between individuals or nations or world peace, then we need to develop a talent for neighbourly love. That's really what the whole of spiritual science is about. It's a support for us on our journey towards becoming virtuosos at neighbourly love. And we're very far from it. When you look at the world situation today, you just have to look at the news and you see that there's a long way to go. And you see the hospitals are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But on the positive side, you can see that, for example, there's a lot of focus on lifestyle medicine and getting rid of bad habits, and people have developed a habit for, could be smoking or something, or for drinking, or for eating food that's not helpful. And people are encouraged and helped to get rid of habits that are unhelpful. So, you can be a virtuoso at something that's not good for you.
And here I think we also see that Martinus has this analysis of human growth, where he says that every experience we do is good in a long-term perspective. So that's why he also says that it is this analysis, this this postulate in the Bible, everything is very good. He says yes, it is really a cosmic truth. And the analysis he does is when we are eternal living beings and we go through this reincarnation, every experience in every lifetime will broaden our perspective, will widen our capacity for understanding other beings and being more empathic and having more compassion. So all these bad habits that we have and this war we see around us is also, in the long term, it is also the end of war, because when we reap
when we reap
the consequences of our bad actions, it will also change us. So we will get the emotional understanding of what we are doing, and that will also make the humane capacity to grow. So that's why he says that everything is very good. When he divides this into two aspects, there is this pleasant good And that's very easy to handle in everyday life. And we have the unpleasant good. It can be very, very unpleasant to be in a war situation or have a very harsh illness or tough relations to be in. So it's not that it's pleasant. It can be very, very unpleasant. But the result is that we get a bigger compassion and understanding of these by virtue of these experiences. And that's why everything is very good. Also, these wars we see around us, it is also a preparation for a future peace, because we get so fed up with wars. So we all will say one day, never again that I will participate in any type of violence and so on.
And since you're talking about that, I mean, we know that today, 2018, we are in a period where many people experience lots of pain and suffering, as you mentioned. So perhaps we should mention too that Martinus tells us that we actually traveled through a spiral cycle, a very, very, very long period of time, and that this time, this lifetime, but even the period of being a terrestrial human being as we know it, is only a part of that spiral cycle. Perhaps you would like to explain that as well.
Well, a spiral cycle is an enormous epoch of time. It's a spiral cycle of evolution, he calls it. And it's an enormous epoch in which darkness culminates and light culminates. So we experience the two basic contrasts that are necessary in order for us to experience life at all. And like Søren was saying, Martinus talks about the pleasant good and the unpleasant good, but one is a precondition for the other. Martinus makes the analogy of a photograph. If the photograph is overexposed, so there's too much light, then you can't really see what's in the picture. And if it's underexposed, so there's too much darkness, you can't see the picture either. So the perfect picture has this perfect balance between light and darkness. And it's the same with our eternal lives, that we need the darkness in order to experience the light. So we need a framework, we need a contours, and this is what the darkness provides. So to think about the spiral cycle, it's hard to say it starts somewhere because it's eternal, but we can theoretically start in the mineral kingdom, where we are actually alive, even though we're not conscious on the physical plane. Or according to Martinus, our consciousness is on the spiritual plane, and this is very, very useful because we can use minerals for building materials. We can make things with them, and we can cut the rocks without them screaming and so on. So we can build houses and roads and so on. And gradually, but they are alive, so they have that consciousness on the spiritual plane. But then the minerals evolve and become more and more conscious on the physical plane and become plants. And through the plant kingdom, there's an evolution from the so-called androgynous plants. They have both sexes within them, and then towards the end of the plant kingdom you can see that they're divided into male and female plants, and then we evolve gradually into the animal kingdom. So we see an increase in physicality, which culminates with the beasts of prey. There we're really physical, very strong, and running around freely. So from being a rock to being a plant that can wave a bit in the wind, then we can move around on 4 legs and then 2 legs, or birds can fly in the sky and so on. And of course the beasts of prey have a mentality that's capable of creating an awful lot of suffering. They have to kill in order to live for themselves. So here we see a kind of culmination of darkness. And then a man comes on the scene and gets up onto 2 legs, and we haven't talked about the sexual poles, but that's also part of this X2 or superconsciousness. The poles begin to change, and we become, from being completely male beings or completely female beings, we begin to go more in the direction of being androgynous again, or double poled as Martinus calls it. And this creates a lot of changes in our mentality, changes that eventually go in the direction towards light. And when the two sexual poles come into balance, then we can only create light for our fellow beings. And then we move into the real human kingdom, which in the first stages will be a paradise on Earth, or on some other planet, but for us on Earth. And then we move into the spiritual part of this spiritual kingdom, and then into even higher kingdoms, which he calls the kingdom of wisdom, where the energy of intelligence culminates, and then the divine world, where intuition culminates. And we're up in the culmination of light, and then a new spiral cycle starts, because when you're up at that level, then you've experienced light and light and light for aeons of time, and by that point your consciousness is becoming like an overexposed photo. It's like kind of white out. If you've ever driven in snow and you can't see the contours of the road on something, you know, your ability to experience the road becomes very, very limited. And in a way you can say your ability to experience the road of life becomes very limited. So then darkness is needed. You need to see the edges. You need to see the contours. And this is where you long for darkness. So at that point, darkness is seen as light, because it's the prerequisite for experiencing life, and the new spiral cycle of evolution begins again. Yeah, that was a very, very brief tour through millions of years of evolution. But so one can summarize by saying a spiral cycle of evolution is an evolutionary epoch in which darkness and light culminate equally.
I think it was very pedagogical and clear, so thank you, Mary. And perhaps we could say then, I think we always wanted to know who we are, but perhaps we also always wanted to understand darkness and suffering, and I think that many people found it very difficult to do that, even through the traditional religions. I know personally friends who actually became atheists because they thought that Catholicism or whatever just couldn't explain suffering and darkness. But here we get actually an explanation to that, don't we?
Yes, and I think if we go to our own experiences, many people can say that I had a very hard time with this illness or this divorce or in this accident or whatever. But when they have come out through it, you could say, and start to come up on the two legs again and have it better again, then most people say that they have learned a lot about it. So through this experience they have grown. So I think whatever worldview you have, that's an experience many people have. And I've heard people saying I wouldn't have been without my cancer, for instance, because I learned so much about myself, my relation, my values of life was changing a lot after that. So I think many people have this experience that dark periods, crisis in life, they also give birth to some new knowledge and also emotional compassion within our consciousness.
I think one thing I have met recently is that some people feel that for example, a friend has died, someone who was very talented, who had really contributed an awful lot in his own field and so on, and they said, well, yeah, everything you've been able to do is wasted, it's gone, what now, and I of course I can't impose my view of these things on people who are not interested in them, but I felt it was a rather tragic way to view death, like everything that person who died did was gone and wasted in a way. Mm. And one could say that with Martinus's view, then nothing is wasted. And if you've built up talents for all sorts of things through a whole life, you have them with you the next time. And that makes me very optimistic, because it's never too late to start learning something. And everything you have achieved and everything you've done for other people and so on, you have it with you. It comes back partly as your fate, like if you've done a lot of things for other people, both good things and bad things. They will come back to you as your own fate. But also the abilities you've built up within yourself, they're not wasted. It's like, Martinus makes the analogy, like if you're learning something, let's say you're learning French, and you study French for a few hours today, and then you go to sleep at night, and you wake up the next morning. It's not like you wake up and think, oh, it'd be a good idea to learn French, I'll start, and you start from scratch again. No, you continue from where you left off the day before. And that's how we learn. We know from our physical lives that we learn by practicing day after day after day. And what we've learned doesn't disappear when we sleep. And death is really just a bigger sleep. So I think it could take away some of people's despair about death. That, oh, everything's wasted. Everything he's done is wasted. It's gone, you know. It isn't. According to Martinus' worldview, it's stored in our superconsciousness, in this X2, this intangible part of our consciousness, and we pick it up when we reincarnate. So if you're really good at something, then you can carry on, and that's of course how we can become virtuosos. You mentioned that it takes about 4 lifetimes to become a brilliant pianist. Well, you know, was it Rembrandt Van Gogh looked at Rembrandt's paintings in Amsterdam, and he said, it takes many, many lives to be able to paint like that. And actually that's a cosmic analysis, according to Martinus. And I don't know if he would say that about Rembrandt, but at least the idea is true, that it takes many lives to be brilliant at certain things. Of course, if you want to learn to drive a car, it takes a number of months or something, and if you want to learn something to bake a cake, maybe it takes a few hours or something. So the talents that you're building up can take different lengths of time depending on the complexity. If you want to learn to be neighbourly loving, it can take many, many lives. But anyway, my message is that nothing is wasted.
Yes, and here I think it's also such a good understanding of suffering, because it's the same thing, as you said. Mm-hmm. Nothing is wasted. The suffering we have had in past lifetimes is still represented in us in this knowledge through compassion. So you can, in a way, you can understand your past lifetimes through looking at, where am I compassionate? Mm. Where do I have empathy for other beings? Where do I get the inspiration to help somebody? Or where do I really think I understand people? That is a sign of, that's where we have been ourselves before. If we are very good at understanding people with a certain illness, for instance, we can really understand from the inside, and we can be good at helping them. That's a sign of that we have been there. And for instance, if some people are very good at helping mental handicapped people, you can be sure that they have experienced something like that before. And that's also a way of understanding how the humane capacity is growing from lifetime to lifetime, and that is thanks to our suffering. So you cannot build up the neighborly love without going through darkness and suffering. So it's not something you can study at the university, it is the study you do in life itself. And that really gives an understanding of why suffering is necessary. It's in fact, you could say, a part of the divine love, that we can, through the suffering, we can open up a new understanding for each other. And that's why we grow in neighborly love.
So in a way you could say that everything that we experience is part of our school of life, isn't it? Yes. And we always have individual lesson plans, it seems. Mm-hmm. Perfect lesson plans. Who makes the lesson plans then for us?
That is the ultimate I. That's God himself. We say him about God, but God is not a he or a she. But there is a providence, according to Martinus, that is controlling our our development, and seeing to it that we always get what's best for us. We always get the experiences that are the most helpful, the most useful in the moment. So Martinus describes life as having various functions. It can be educational and entertaining, and it can bring us up. It has this function of upbringing.
Yeah. I think there are also two aspects of this. You could say there is this eternal world plan. We talked about the spiral cycle. So that's a kind of divine plan for where we are heading. And it's also within us. The spiral cycle is not something without us. It is how the superconsciousness is working through our evolution. And then from this state of evolution where we act from our talents and react on things in our everyday life. And that sends out energy. And we know from different religions, we talk about karma, we talk about as you sow, you will reap. And so in that way, we are kind of doing all the details with our education. But as you said, the providence or the guardian angels, they do this, they synchronize.
Yes.
And they make the disposition of our details. And as we know, when we are together with some people, there are some aspects of us that are activated. And in that sense, the meetings with different people will activate different sides of us. The same thing with different incarnations. If you incarnate with these parents, then certain aspects of you will be activated, and maybe other aspects will be resting this lifetime. So our fate is formed during our journey through life, but it's our own actions, our own thoughts, our own feelings that are mirrored in the relations with others or in the fate. But as you said, the providence and the guardian angels, they have this overview over our process from lifetime to lifetime. So they have a kind of a general plan, and we are also making out all the details in our everyday life.
So perhaps there's two answers to that question: who makes the lesson plans? Is God or Providence? But we create them ourselves too. He sometimes compares our life to a theatre, doesn't he? The only thing is that we are the actors, we are the directors, but we also write the script, don't we?
Yes. Yeah.
So in that sense, it's a very broad perspective, and of course that's very hopeful, because then we can do something about it as well. Yes. I was thinking about where we started when we said that these reflections on our eternal core being, as you have described it, could be quite abstract in a way to understand x1, x2, x3. It's divided, but it's not divided at the same time. It can only be divided as a way of thinking.
Yes,
as an abstraction, theoretically, but it's not. So it's one and divided at the same time, and that could be quite abstract. But I was going to ask you how we can use this in our everyday life. I mean, in earlier epochs, perhaps religious mystics and philosophers pondered about eternity and so on, but Martinus doesn't really recommend us to sit down in monasteries and nunneries and just think about eternity, does he? I mean, he recommends us to use this knowledge, to use this spiritual science.
I think one thing that this analysis has helped me with is to understand my own identity, like this structure of having an I that experiences and creates, but I have an ability to create an experience, and I have an organism, physical and mental, through which I experience and create. But also to understand that this is the same structure that God has. So the Bible talks about man in God's image, after his likeness, like that we are created in God's image. And you can ask, well, how can that be true? And what does that mean? And Martinus describes this basic structure, this triune structure, is the same on every level of existence. So The plants have the same triune structure. The details can be different. The different the combinations of the basic energies in our consciousness can be different. But I think through these analyses, then I can see that, yeah, it can sound very arrogant, but I have the same analysis as God himself. The only difference being that God has nothing outside. Like God being the entirety also has an I, an ability to create an experience, and an organism. It's just that God's organism consists of every other living being's organism in existence. So God is this all-embracing living being. So yeah, maybe it doesn't sound that practical, but I think to have solved your own identity, to find out who you actually are, that's been a very major thing for me.
And I think also that this analysis of our eternal core of being, it really gradually change our relation to life, in that sense that the more we understand our eternal aspect, we also get more trust. Because I think we have lived so many lifetimes that we've been chased by a devil or the coincidences and so on. And the more you learn about the eternal aspects, and that our superconsciousness is governing our evolution, and it's something we also ourselves are creating our future, with patience of course, then you can rest in the process in another way, and you can start gradually to learn that also the unpleasant is something that is part of a learning process, and also a loving care for evolution. And that really changes my way of relating to life. I get more trust, and I feel more confident with that even if I go through a crisis or problems or an illness, it is in fact something that is making me grow as a person. So I think that part of the understanding is really changing everyday life, my relation to life.
I think that sounds very comforting and very inspiring as well. And unfortunately, I think it's time to wrap it up for this episode. There's much more to talk about, but we'll have to do that next time. But thank you so much for joining me today, Sören and Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.